much, Darren, and thanks for the invitation. Matthew, enjoyed your presentation. So I've been asked to talk about labor economics. So factors of production. We always talk about the factors of production. So what are the factors of production?
Labor, capital, and knowledge.
Land, labor, and capital is the normal phrase, but you came close. And then we add entrepreneurship, right? Which we just talked about. By the way, I have something, so by the way, this is my new website. I have a brand new website, America's Economist. I was designated America's Economist last year at the Money Show, so I'm running with it.
Nice.
You always have to be marketing. This is my email address if you'd like to write to me. So I like to engage in one-word descriptions of the schools of economics. You've been talking about Austrian economics. So if you wanted to use one term to describe the schools of thought, the one that they really focus on the most. For classical, Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, it's all about economic growth, the wealth of nations, how to increase it, what policies decrease it. The Marxists, if they would say, what do we care about the most? They'd say the worker, labor. The Austrians, I think, it's capital, investment, entrepreneurship might be another word you may want to use, but they put that all under capital, in my opinion. So even though Marx invented the word capitalism, the Austrians dominate with their focus on capital. Keynesians, it's all about spending. Just get the consumer to spend, the business to spend. If they don't spend, the government needs to spend. For the Chicago School under Friedman, it's all about money. Friedman denied it, but fact is that money matters to them. And when you talk to supply-siders, it's all about tax cuts. It's a good way for students to remember the different schools of thought. So where does labor fit in the structure of production? So if you read Karl Menger's classic Grundsatz, or translated the principles of economics, everything's about the production of goods. And so you have the general theory of the good. The general theory of goods is the focus. So I have this four-stage model of the economy that I've created. By the way, there's no textbook in the country that has this four-stage model of the economy in it. Because I've studied textbooks. None of them have it. Except for mine, of course. And so I've applied the Austrian theory, the Mengerian view of the economy in terms of four-stage model of the economy. Starts off, and this applies to all goods and services. All goods and services go through this four-stage model. Resources are produced, then distributed, and then consumed or invested in business. And the four factors of production are operating at each stage of production. With what goal in mind? To produce a final product that people can use. Because almost every product is in its raw state is unusable. Yes, occasionally you can get an orange or an apple off of a tree and just it's there by nature, but almost everything, the hammer you use is iron ore that's converted to steel, that's then made into a hammer and then sent through the supply process to the retail store, and you buy the hammer and then you can use the hammer. So they all go through these stages, and you notice you add value at each stage of production. If you don't add value, you wouldn't produce it. So that's where the profit margin becomes. So out of land, labor, and capital, those three goods, which one is the most flexible? So which one is the most flexible? What do you think? Land, labor, or capital?
Labor.
Why?
More dispensable. You can hire and fire more easily than you can acquire more land.
Okay, well, that's true from the point of view of the employer, but what about the worker themselves? Why would the worker be more flexible?
I guess in terms of like how much of like labor hours and like they can supply, it's not as fixed, I guess.
I guess I'm thinking more in terms of what the worker can do. Can you do just one thing in life? I tell my students you're graduating with a degree, but I pretty much guarantee you that you're going to end up doing something different than what you majored in. I didn't major in economics, but I ended up writing an investment newsletter. And economics, I didn't take a single course in investing. It wasn't offered at the time. It was all high theory and mathematics. That's what I was taking. And it still is to a large extent. So labor is the most flexible because you can change, you can retrain yourself to do something else. A tractor is a tractor is a tractor. It can only do certain things. Now maybe you could drive a tractor to and from work, but not likely. There's not a lot of flexibility, not a lot of specificity, as we use the term, specificity. And land, of course, is extremely limited. You can't move land. Land does have different uses, but it's just not as flexible. Labor is the most flexible. And the great thing about that is that therefore unemployment can be temporary, Land, sometimes you see land that's empty and unused for years. If somebody's unemployed for years, it's because he's being paid to be unemployed. That's the only reason, okay? So labor has this special, unique feature of being very flexible, that you can change jobs. And that's good because in a dynamic creative destruction or creative disruption, I prefer creative disruption to describe the capitalist system, you have to be willing to change jobs. Okay, so let's talk about the labor issues in labor economics. They are wages and benefits, employment and unemployment, and capital labor disputes. Historically, there's been lots of those. So let's talk about a fundamental issue, why wages rise. And F.A. Harper, known as Baldy Harper, wrote a really interesting book in 1957 called Why Wages Rise. And he said, higher wages come from increased output per hour of work. Now, do you know what we call that in economics? What do we call that? What's increased output per hour of work in one word?
Productivity.
Productivity. Is that what you're going to say?
No, the one word part I was going to say was something that was three. Well, I didn't get the one word part. I had my hand raised before.
Oh, yeah, productivity.
Yeah.
Productivity is the correct word, okay? But if you say to people, well, wages go up because of productivity, you will get blank stares from students because they have no idea what that means. Now, output per man hour, that gives you a little bit more sense of what you can do with this concept. But this is a really interesting chart that shows that real hourly compensation has been rising over time, because every worker, most workers have increased output per hour. They've increased their productivity. And you also notice that real hourly earnings have been stagnating. Now, the labor union economists, they'll point to this, saying, oh, wow, since 1972, in the early 70s, real wages have stagnated. Our standard of living has gone nowhere under capitalism. And of course, that demonstrates the importance of looking at the right statistics, because statistics can lie. You ever heard that? And so what's the gap here? What is the difference between compensation and wages?
Health benefits.
Benefits, which we used to call fringe benefits, but now we can say they're more than fringe benefits. So you need to add earnings plus benefit. Those benefits don't come free. Employers have to pay for those benefits. Sometimes workers pay for it. You split the difference. That can happen. But there's been an emphasis on benefits, because benefits are tax deductible. They're encouraged. Everybody needs to have medical insurance, life insurance, paid vacations. It's all in the benefits. Okay. Okay. So there's another chart that shows this stagnation thesis that is being used. I mean, this is put out by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, by the U.S. government, to give you an indication that your wage earners are being given a bad deal, a rotten deal, and creating envy of the rich and also criticism of the rich. You have a question?
Mm-hmm. So what's the incentive for increasing benefits as opposed to like increasing compensation itself? Like why invent?
I think it's competition from other companies. The other companies are offering benefits and you're not. You're giving a higher wage. I think there's that tendency for businesses to provide the medical insurance and so forth. If you don't provide medical insurance, a lot of people are going to go somewhere else.
And well, but doesn't that also that would cause a lot of stagnation, right? Where people won't leave their place of work, not because of the benefits that they have accumulated that they don't want to give up, or they don't face that.
Pensions are, for example, defined benefit plans are very that encourages people to stay on to make sure they qualify for the pension. The other thing I would mention, and I get into this here, is let's see, showing the productivity and compensation moving up together. But I would like to focus. This is what we call complexity economics. When you look at this, you probably glaze over a little bit. So I have to explain what this chart is. But over time, since 1900, we've added all kinds of benefits to households. Okay, so we've added the telephone, the automobile, the stove, the refrigerator, electricity, clothing, a washer and dryer, air conditioning, dishwasher, microwave, VCR, computer, color TV, internet. All right, so what this demonstrates, and even since 1975, look at the dramatic increase in all these services that didn't exist prior to that time period. So the real wage stagnation thesis is really a distortion of what's happening. People's standard of living is increasing rather dramatically, as evidenced by all these different products that you can see. More and more households are getting up to these high levels of 80 to 90% of all households have all of these goods. Now, to some extent, government is involved here since 1965 with the war on poverty and that sort of thing, so that even poor people on welfare, they get all these things. In Section 8 housing, for example, there's lots of examples. John Stossel did a program one time where he went into the homes of poor people and said, oh yeah, so you have a microwave, oh, you have air conditioning, oh, you have a car, you have a cell phone. Fantastic. Okay, so there are ways to measure and see. One of the problems, if I go back, one of the problems with this thesis is this is propaganda. This is used as propaganda to say you're being left behind under capitalism. And it really isn't true. And hopefully people can look over this. But Rainier Zitelmann is a German economist and sociologist, historian as well, and has written a lot of books. He's kind of an up-and-coming economist, and he's a very wealthy man, and he paid for a survey to see from country to country all around the world how anti-rich people are, anti-wealthy, anti-capitalist. So he did all these surveys, and he found there were, for example, Chile, which has the most free market, fastest growing economy in Latin America, they elected a socialist. They elected a socialist because they had been taught in the colleges and the universities growing up, and now they're voting and they say, oh, capitalism is bad, even though they've done really well. But because there's this rhetoric out there, anti-rich rhetoric, it's been very destructive. And I fear the same kind of thing happening in the United States. So we need more things like this. I teach my students quantity, quality, and variety of goods and services, which is a Mengerian point of view, by the way. Menger said you need to measure standard of living not from real wages, but from the quantity, quality, and variety of goods and services that you can buy. So I have my students, I'll have a student go to Albertsons, a large Albertsons, and find out how many different kinds of bread there are. I'll have another student go to the local liquor store, large liquor store, and find out how many different kinds of beers there are. You would be shocked. Everybody is shocked. You know how many different kinds of bread there are in Albertsons?
22.
150 different kinds of bread. 150 different kinds of supply and demand curves. Being created by entrepreneurs. Okay, how many different kinds of beer there are, including your seasonal beers.
550.
800. Over 800 in a large liquor store. They're not all there, but they can order them. They put out a computer printout, and the student brings the computer printout. How many different kinds of shampoos are? Can you get the same shampoo twice? Can you get the same toothpaste twice? It's hard. I end up with different toothpaste almost every time. Okay, so that shows you things that are going on. And also you need to know about this new way of measuring standard of living, and that is what the average wage earner can buy. How much time does it take to work to buy a particular product? So you think gasoline prices are high? Actually, it says here that people took 25 minutes to buy a gallon of gasoline back in 1929. Now it's down to 5 cents. So even though inflation has gone up and the price of gasoline is $4, $3 or $4, or maybe $5 here in California due to taxes, in real terms, in terms of your ability to earn money to pay for it, there's been a rather dramatic drop. Okay? So time prices in this book by Superabundance at Marion Tupy and Gail Pooley has gotten a lot of publicity. It's pretty interesting statistic. So let's talk now about capital labor disputes. So the best example that I know of is Andrew Carnegie, Carnegie Steel. So there was a union, the steel workers in Homestead. Now Homestead is right outside Pittsburgh. That's where the Carnegie Steel Company was located. They did a deal to reduce the hours worked from 12 hours down to 8 hours. 8 hours a day. Well, this was great. The workers loved this because this meant, oh, we can spend time with our family. We don't have to come home and just collapse and then go to work the next day. So they thought this was a great victory. And they also got a wage increase. However, in 1892, steel prices started falling. And this was cutting into the profit margins. So Carnegie decided, I'm going to scrap this deal we've made with the labor unions, and we're going to bring them back to work at a lower wage. So they're going to go up to 10 hours instead of 12 hours. So they were 8 hours, now they're going up to 10 hours. And we're going to cut wages. Why? Because Andrew Carnegie is not making the kind of money that he was expecting. So he took off to Scotland in his mansion and left Frick, his assistant, to handle the blowback they got when they said, we're going to scrap the agreement. Well, needless to say, the workers went on strike at the Homestead. So they had the Homestead Night in 1892. Well, Frick brought in the Pinkertons. The Pinkertons are armed. Coming down one of the three rivers, I can't remember which one, the Ohio River, coming down the river. And the strikers opened up on a fire. You always hear the story, it's the Pinkertons who have the guns and are shooting. No, these were the strikers. The strikers went after them because they were so upset. And with good reason, okay? They had a good rational reason. And then, so the governor brought in the military and suppressed. So the strikers lost on this deal. And they had to go back to work at lower wages and more work hours. Okay, so this is your classic example of a capital labor dispute. And it brings out the sense of the robber barons. Andrew Carnegie, who puts himself out as this great billionaire who's helped out Carnegie Steel, and he sold his company to U.S. Steel that J.P. Morgan put together and created U.S. Steel in 1901. This is the biggest IPO. It was the first $1 billion IPO that was created in 1901. And Andrew Carnegie sold his Carnegie Steel Company for $300 million, becoming an extremely wealthy man and philanthropist and so forth. So they were on a cruise together, J.P. Morgan and Andrew Carnegie. And Andrew Carnegie is having dinner with J.P. Morgan, and he's saying, I really wonder if I got a good deal. I think I should have asked for $500 million instead of $300 million. To which J.P. Morgan said, if you had, I would have paid it. To which J.P. Morgan excused himself and had a very bad evening. He was really furious about this. So anyway, you hear these stories about we try to, there's a lot of revisionist history by free market economists who have written that the robber baron thing is a myth and stuff like that. Well, there were a lot of positive things that came out of it. But you have to remember that there were no MBA programs. Industrial Revolution was all new. The idea of millionaires being created was something that only existed among kings. This is the first time private citizens were becoming super wealthy. And they didn't know how to be more setting those high moral standards that we talk about today among workers. So that's a story I tell all my students about to tell them that capitalists can make mistakes, okay? Capitalists can make mistakes. And then I switch gears to a few years later, and we talk about Henry Ford and the famous 1914 meeting that he had. And all students of history need to know this story. So Henry Ford does the Model T. Model T was the most successful assembly line oriented new automobile that everybody was excited about. And cost $500, which was a lot of money back then, so only rich people could afford the Model Ts. Everyone else was riding horses and stuff like that. And at one point, Henry Ford said, you know, if I'd asked customers what they wanted, they'd say a faster horse. But he was an entrepreneur, and he came up with the Model T, and it was so successful that in January of 1914, he gathered together his board, and he said, "I have great news. Now I want to have all of you become members of the board. Pretend you are members of the board, okay? You are supporters. So let's see how your reaction is as board members. I am going to be Henry Ford. All right? Gentlemen, and by the way, only gentlemen were there, so you have to pretend you're a gentleman, which we can do in today's world. Okay, gentlemen, I have great news. We just made a record $30 million this year. What do you say? Nice. That's it? That's right. Standing ovation. They were pretty excited about this. We have made a record $30 million. And I said, now listen, we have the decision as board members to decide what to do with that money. You're all voting members of the board. So your first choice is number one. There's three choices we can do with this money. Number one, retained earnings. Retained earnings. So how many of you do you understand what retained earnings are? What retained earnings are meaning that we take that money and we keep it ourselves. And we use it to expand the plant, to maybe improve our assembly line, maybe to hire some more workers, maybe to create a new plant. We have $30 million, and let's just keep it all ourselves as retained earnings to improve the quality and the productivity of our company. All in favor, raise your hand. Okay, so now everybody needs to raise your hand because they all said yes, we all for that. Okay, choice number two. You've all been long-suffering supporters of me. You've been on the board for over 10 years. You've never been paid a dividend. Why don't we take some of that $30 million and pay a dividend? All in favor? Yes, they jumped up with joy with that one. They all voted for that one. Okay. Choice number three. How about those long-suffering workers that are building the Model Ts? Let's give them a raise. Right now they get $2 a day. That's all they get. How about we give them a raise? All in favor? You're good. Listen, if you were alive today, would you vote for it? Let me tell you something that you students are unaware of. The only reason workers get a raise is because corporate profits have gone up. If corporate profits have gone up, you're not going to get a raise. I guarantee you, unless the government imposes a minimum wage, you're not going to get a raise. The key to increase, and we talked about the productivity, the increase in productivity, and it is to some extent due to competition between workers in different companies and so forth. But I guarantee you the key factor in raising wages is companies are making more money and they can afford to give it out to workers. So anyway, Henry Ford, so yeah, they all voted against it. And why did they vote against it? Because at $2 a day, they could get plenty of workers. They didn't need to give a raise. People were lining up to work. Now, they had serious problems of negligence and people not showing up for illness, and absenteeism was rampant among the Ford Motor Company. But they always said, oh, we can get new workers. All right, so that was their argument. Henry Ford said, turned to his accountant and said, well, what if we pay him $3 a day? How does that squeeze our record profits? And he said, well, figured it out, you're down to $28 million. So then he said, well, how about $4? And well, you're down to $26 million in profit. So they argued for 2 hours, the board did, on doing this. And finally, Henry Ford said the following. You know, board, I'm the majority shareholder, so I can decide on my own. And in fact, tomorrow morning, we're announcing $5 a day. $5 a day, okay? That's called the $5 a day story. Did it make history? Front page news all across the country.
What was his impetus for doing this? Was this his heart? Was this he felt like he wanted to keep the workforce stable so he could?
He's what we call a visionary capitalist that Andrew Carnegie was not, or J.D. Rockefeller was not, or J.P. Morgan was not. He recognized that this was a win-win situation for the workers as well as the company. And this made record news, so people lined up like crazy, of course. And nobody was absent the next day for illness or what have you. Everybody showed up for work. And the next year, they made even more profits because the workers were hardworking, they become better trained, they didn't want to lose their job, and they were better workers because of it. And for the first time, in fact, I'll bring this up here because that brings up Karl Marx and the Marxist criticism. Marxist criticism of capitalism was twofold, and he was gaining a lot of ground in that time period. One is exploitation. The capitalists get all the money, even though the workers do all the work. By the way, you know who this is? Anton Menger. Anybody know who that is?
That's my
Brother. He was a hardcore socialist. And he wrote a book called The Right to the Whole Produce of Labor. And that's what Marx was saying, that the workers did all the work, they deserve all the profits. He failed to recognize the value of the entrepreneur. So the capitalists never share the wealth. That was the first criticism. Second one is alienation. You know what alienation is? Now this is something you learn in sociology. Alienation is you're working for the man. You're not working for yourself. If you weren't being paid, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing. And a lot of times you produce the product that you yourself can't benefit from. And in this case, all the workers at the Ford Motor Company did not come in on a car, Model T. None of them could afford the Model T. So what was really interesting, in one day, in January 1914, the $5 a day story destroyed the two biggest Marxist arguments against capitalism. Because for the first time, Henry Ford, a capitalist, shared the wealth with his workers, gave them a raise. And second of all, with that raise at $5 a day, they could afford to buy the car they were producing. This is why one of the main reasons communism and Marxism never really caught on, particularly in the United States like it has in other countries, because of Ford. And the Marxists referred, somebody needs to be back in there, the Marxists referred to this as Fordism, and they hate Fordism. I can guarantee you, because it destroyed the revolutionary zeal of the workers. The workers, once they became partners now. This is what we call the stakeholder philosophy, which I know a lot of my free market friends have criticized, that shareholder philosophy is the correct view. but I see it quite differently. I think that we've made great progress through Ford and through the win-win type of approach that we have with all the stakeholders. Now, Eugen von Bavarick was a student of Menger. It's the second generation. And Eugen von Bavarick and Wieser, particularly von Bavarick, was particularly really good in his criticism of this idea that profits are stolen from the workers. Okay, that's the Marxist point of view. And Eugen von Bavarick, in his called Capitalism and Interest, he critiqued the Marxist arguments that he said capitalists and entrepreneurs do deserve legitimately the fruits of their labors. One is the weighting argument. Okay, so how many of you have a part-time job? Okay, how often do you get paid? Once a month, usually once every 2 weeks, right? It varies, okay? Get paid like clockwork, right? Whether the company makes money or not, you're going to get paid. Generally speaking, unless they go bankrupt. But before they go bankrupt, you're paid on a regular basis. But the capitalist has to wait for his profits. Okay, so there is legitimacy in the waiting. And I run a couple of businesses myself. I run FreedomFest, which is for-profit. I have my own publishing firm, and I pay workers on a regular basis. And if my profits are large or small, I still pay the workers a certain amount. So there's no waiting by the employers. They get paid, while the capitalists have to wait. Well, that's their reward for waiting. The other is the risk argument. As an employee, what is your risk in the business? Well, it's negligible, okay? But the capitalist, the entrepreneur, is taking very big risks. And so they deserve fruits of their labors for the high risks that they take. So these arguments made a lot of sense in von Bavarick. And then tomorrow, when I talk about capital theory, von Bavarick has this Positive Theory of Capital, a book that he wrote in 1890. Eugen von Bavarick was the most famous economist of the turn of the century. I don't know if you knew that or not. Yeah, Eugen von Bavarick was, and he was on the banknote. He saved Austria 3 times from bankruptcy on a national scale. Got him back on the gold standard. So he was put on the Austrian shilling note because of it. So I'd like to talk a little bit about economic sociology. Economic sociology, I have a chapter, let me pull out my book here. So I've written this book called The Making of Modern Economics, which is a history of the great economic thinkers, and it starts with Adam Smith. And I'm really proud of my chapter 10, which is right in the middle, after economics is developed and advanced with the Austrian school and the British school and the neoclassical model and so forth. And then I have chapter 10, which is my chapter on economic sociology. You know, one of the things that I've always felt was missing in the way economics is taught is they leave out the sociologists. And by that, if they bring in one sociologist, is Thorstein Veblen. Thorstein Veblen, who wrote The Theory of Conspicuous Consumption. The Theory of the Leisure Class is what his book is. And he's very critical of capitalism. He thinks it's barbaric and it needs to be replaced by technical people to run people's lives and run businesses and so forth. But I brought in Max Weber. Max Weber, W-E-B-E-R, is a German economist who actually taught at the University of Vienna for some time. And he he wrote a book on the capitalism and the Protestant ethic. And he said that, no, capitalism is not barbaric, it is a holy calling. He combined religion and economics. And he had kind of a Calvinist point of view, and he used Ben Franklin as a classic example of a person who used virtuous principles to become a successful capitalist. So it's your calling and so forth. But there are many sociologists in this field, and one of them in particular that I like is Peter Drucker. So Peter Drucker was considered during his lifetime as the world's #1 management guru. And he wrote a book on General Motors called the General, I think it was called The Corporation. And he argued that he said, what is the ideal social institution in today's modern world? What is the ideal social institution? Now, for many years, it used to be the church. That was the ideal social institution. But more and more in the secular world, church religion has become less influential. So what should it be replaced with? Did I keep hitting that? Keeps going on? Okay, I'll try to walk this way. I like to walk around, as you can tell. And I also wear a hat, by the way. I wear a hat because I say, students, put your economics hat on, and let's analyze this problem. So I try to do some things so that people can remember the professor with the hat. So, Peter Drucker wrote, he was an Austrian, born in Vienna, Austria, familiar with Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek and Joseph Schumpeter and so forth. But he went into management, he went into business, and he became one of the most successful gurus. And at Claremont University, they have the Drucker School of management there. So he's written a dozen books on management and so forth. And he wrote this book about the corporation. He said the future, the ideal social institution used to be the church, then it was replaced by government. So government became the institution. So it's government that has Social Security, Medicare. We have a welfare program. We have Medicaid. We're taking care of you, and so forth, right? Drucker wrote a book on the large corporation as the ideal social institution. Why is that? Well, 8 hours a day, if you have a job, where is it at? Is it at the church? Is it at the Social Security office? No, you have a job. When you graduate as students, you're going to work for a company. Now, it can be a nonprofit, but generally speaking, the vast majority of companies are for-profit. In fact, nonprofits would not exist without for-profit companies. And I tell students, do not start off graduating and working for a nonprofit. You need to work for the companies that finance the nonprofits and finance the government. So in the triangle of government and other and nonprofits, including the churches, and the business, it's business that you should start off on. So you can get a sense of what's happening, because it's business that finances all of these other companies. So Drucker made this point and used General Motors after World War II as his example of the ideal social institution. Of course, GM was furious that they were using him, using their company as the key indicator, because that would say Drucker said, well, that means that you should provide medical services, that you should provide paid vacations, that you should provide life insurance, that you should provide a pension system that's a lot better than Social Security. Now, unfortunately, they imitated Social Security, so they developed a defined benefit plan. And you know what a defined benefit plan is, as opposed to a defined contribution plan? A defined benefit plan is where they tell you how much money you're going to get when you retire after 20 years. They give you the exact amount, and they're guaranteed to pay that. The problem is it creates unfunded liabilities. And they were imitating the Social Security system, because the Social Security system is a defined benefit plan. You pay into it, and based on that, they set a certain level of how much money they're going to pay you for. But it creates unfunded liabilities problems. It's not just Social Security that has unfunded liability problems. There's major corporations had billions of dollars that they owed their retired workers, and what if the company doesn't do too well? Well, then the pension system blows up on them. But what Drucker was trying to argue was that companies, private companies, who are very entrepreneur and not administrative and not bureaucratic. Schumpeter in particular felt that he was once asked, can socialism work? Of course it can. Will capitalism win out in the end? No, I don't think it will. He was a pessimist, like most Austrians, by the way. Most Austrians are pessimists. Hayek was a pessimist, Mises was a pessimist, Schumpeter was a pessimist, Murray Rothbard was a pessimist about the future of our country. I don't know if you all knew this, but
I have a lot of questions.
Yes.
Rothbard was definitely pessimistic. He never would buy, he thought Reagan was doing nothing good. He completely missed the biggest bull market in history. I know, because Murray and I, we spent time together. I know the whole story.
But optimistic about the prospects for liberty.
No. No, in fact, when Hayek wrote a second introduction to Road to Serfdom, notice Road to Serfdom? You want to know what the most controversial chapter is in that book, The Road to Serfdom? Chapter 10. You know what the title is? Why the worst get on top. Now, of course, he wrote it in 1944. And the worst were on top, right? You had Hitler, you had Stalin, you had Mussolini, and according to him, FDR. Now, others didn't feel that way about FDR, but he did. The worst were getting on top. So when Margaret Thatcher won, who held up the Road to Serfdom saying, this influence has made me decide to run for office, and when Reagan won and gave Hayek the Freedom Award and so on, in the second edition he said, no, not very little chance that things are going to work out. He was rather pessimistic. And Murray Rothbard, he just railed against Reagan. He could not see anything good coming out of Reagan. Reagan. Yes.
So in today's world, do you think their pessimism would be justified? Like in 2025, are they to remain as pessimistic about the prospects of the world as they were when the quote-unquote worst part?
Austrians are very similar to Marxists in that regard. They're pessimists. Marxists, the most common book title is the decline of capitalism. That's their most common title, and Austrians tend to be critical. Now maybe that's changing. We have a new generation, and you're more optimistic. By the way, the Chicago school is very optimistic. Friedman, Stigler, and so forth. Not so much Stigler, but Friedman and his followers always optimistic and thinking things can be turned around and so forth. They're very upbeat about the Trump turnaround and that sort of thing, getting rid of all the woke culture and the waste and what's happening in Doge and so on. I mean, there's a feeling of optimism that's coming around. I don't know if the Austrians fit into that category, but there is this, the national debt is going to collapse at any time now. Murray was really good on the national debt. He said in Man, Economy and State that conservatives way overplay how the national debt is going to collapse the economy. So he was very good on that. But he definitely was extremely negative on Reaganomics. He could not see any benefits to the Reaganomics type of thing. Drucker, by the way, was very close to Mises because Drucker taught at NYU, New York University, and would see Ludwig von Mises on campus. And he said, I never met a more depressing individual than Ludwig von Mises. That's what he said. I'll give you an example of Mises' pessimism. He was asked one time to give a lecture at Harvard University or one of the other major Ivy League schools. He doesn't identify it, but I think it's Harvard. And he was asked to come in and give a lecture. He refused. He said, how can, in 1 hour, I possibly reverse all the errors and mistakes of 30 years of teaching? I just can't do it. Now, I can tell you right now, if I was asked to give a lecture at Harvard, I'd jump at the opportunity to go in and talk about, you never know what lights would come on to the students in the audience, you know? So that's the kind of pessimism that reigned. And it's understandable what they went through, 2 world wars and the Great Depression, and Austria went through hyperinflation that we haven't experienced before.
So it's not their economics that made them pessimists.
I think it was
It's not
real life
experiences.
Yeah, real life experiences.
Climate, geography.
I mean, I just...
Well, we have an Austrian here with us, and he's an optimist, right? Peter is from
I wouldn't say so.
He just proved this point. We have an Austrian.
Good to see you.
Tell us.
I didn't see you here. That's nice. Good to see you. All right, so getting back to economic sociology. By the way, sociologists are all socialists, pretty much. It's really, if you major in any of you major in sociology, you are going to get incredible propaganda from those people. But one of the few people I really like in sociology is Peter Drucker and also Max Weber. Much better than Veblen and so forth. So my chapter juxtaposes Veblen with Weber. And I'm the only history of thought person that includes Weber in my history of thought. He considered himself an economist, first and foremost. So this concept that Drucker has of the large, not the small corporation, by the way, the large corporation, he felt has the possibility of being the ideal social institution. So if you're a small business, sometimes you can't afford all those benefits that are listed there. That's one of the problems with the small corporation. But if you can become a big corporation, then that works out better. But the biggest criticism of is this division of labor problem. It's an interesting issue that you raise, specialization, and the Austrians are really great with specialization, and Adam Smith was too. He started off with the pin factory in the division of labor. He said this was the key indicator for economic growth. It was not capital formation, but specialization, where you can specialize in one particular field. And more we're getting that way. Very few people are generalist medical doctors, for example. You're a surgeon and it's brain surgery or focusing on children being born and all that sort of thing. So we're seeing more and more specialization. But Marx railed against specialization. He says, this is what I hate about capitalism, because you need to be a generalist. Everybody needs to be liberal arts education, and that's all you major in, so that the end of the day, you hunt in the morning, you rear cattle in the afternoon, you are a critic at night. You criticism at night. That was his thing, and he said, so as a result, you're not a hunter by nature, you're not a fisherman, you're not a cattle raiser, you're not a critic in general, but you're a generalist, and you don't have any special things. He didn't like the idea that you're working just to make money. You're working for the man. And and the others fit into that category. So that's, I like the Weber, Drucker, others that seem to fit into that category. So one of my favorite heroes is the libertarian John Mackey, he's the founder of Whole Foods Market. I created my wheel, I actually call it the Wheel of Fortune. And so this is the stakeholder philosophy. The shareholder philosophy is investors are the main most important factor. In Mackey's model, so you have employees, executives, investors, communities, suppliers, and customers. According to John Mackey, in the wheel of business, which is the most important person or group?
Sorry, according to Mackey.
Yeah.
Community?
Huh?
Community?
No. That's important. It's a stakeholder.
It's not the biggest, but the entrepreneur in the center that binds them all together.
No. It's not the entrepreneur. No.
Employees?
No.
Customers?
Huh?
Customers.
The customer. And if you go into Whole Foods and you look on their board, they talk about how they want to satisfy you as a customer. Now, which of the six is the most neglected?
Employees.
No, it's not employees. No, not community.
Suppliers.
It's the suppliers. You got them both right. Believe me, no student has gotten them all right, but you did, and you're not a student. So I highly recommend his book, Conscious Capitalism, and also Conscious Leadership. And but he does, like on community, 5% of his profits of Whole Foods goes to the community, nonprofits in the community. And they also specialize in local products that are produced locally. So, and their profit margins are double what it is at Albertsons. So they pay their workers more. Minimum wage, none of them have been unionized because they pay their workers a lot more and stuff. So this is a great model. I'm a big believer in the stakeholder philosophy. And yeah, you do spend 8 hours a day. Your friendships, a lot are people you work with on a regular basis. So there's a lot to be said for this thing. So companies with stock options, really important. These are employees, not executives, not CEOs, but employees. These are secretaries. These are staff people. These are people who take care of the work during the day through stock options and profit sharing. And Microsoft set the standard with Bill Gates right from the get-go. He said, "I'm going to offer stock options to all of my people." So that turned out to be a really big successful program. The key here is that it's sharing the profit. So the difference between socialism and capitalism is really simple. Capitalism shares the profits. socialism shares the poverty. That's the difference. And so this is a great quote from the Israeli economist, Shalom Atal. Who has a good voice? I'd like to read this. Okay?
The health and wealth of a large number of individual businesses, small, medium, and large, determine the economic health and wealth of a nation. When they succeed, managers create wealth, income, and jobs for a large number of people. When they fail, working people and their businesses suffer. And their families suffer. It is businesses that create wealth, not countries or governments.
So I think it's a really good summary of labor economics. Thank you very much. I think we're over time, so